Okay, so imagine this. A sudden trade shock hits one of the world's fastest growing economies. The US imposes these massive new tariffs on India. And former RBI Governor Raghuram Rajan, he's calling it a major wake up call. So let's dive right in and unpack what he's saying. It all kicks off with this one absolutely staggering number 50%. Now, you have to understand, in the world of global trade, a number that high isn't just a minor adjustment, it's a full blown earthquake. And that's exactly what this is. It's the new tariff rate the US has just slapped on a whole range of Indian goods. Believe me, a move like this isn't some quiet policy memo. It puts the entire business world, both in India and the US, on immediate high alert. And if you want to get a sense of just how serious this is, just listen to Raghuram Rajan's reaction. He called it deeply distressing. That's pretty strong language coming from a former central banker. It tells you right away this is way more than just some routine policy shift. So let's first take a look at the immediate fallout from this tariff shock. Because according to Rajan, this isn't just about numbers on a spreadsheet. We're talking about a real blow to international relationships and, more importantly, to people's actual livelihoods. So who really ends up paying the price for all this? Well, Rajan points to a kind of domino effect. It starts with the small Indian exporters. Think about shrimp farmers and textile makers. They get hit first and hardest. Of course, that immediately puts the livelihoods of all their workers in jeopardy. But the pain doesn't just stop at the border. Ultimately, it's the U.S. consumer who's going to pay 50% more for these goods. And simmering underneath it all, the diplomatic relationship between the two countries takes a really big hit. All right, so that covers the what. But the real question, the one you're probably asking, is why? Why this specific move and why right now? Well, to answer that, we've got to decode the playbook that's driving all of this. Before we get back to India specifically, we kind of have to get inside the administration's head for a second. What is it about tariffs that they find so darn appealing as a tool? Well, according to Rajan's analysis, their thinking really boils down to three core beliefs. First, there's this long-held idea that trade deficits are basically proof that other countries are taking advantage of the US. Second is the view that tariffs are essentially free money, that it's paid by other countries, not by American consumers. And third, and this one is absolutely key, is seeing tariffs as a punitive tool, a way to exert force and punish other countries without ever firing a single shot. Okay, so that explains the general philosophy, but it still doesn't answer the most puzzling question of all. Why was India singled out? Why did they get hit so much harder than all of their neighbors? And I mean, just look at this disparity. It is absolutely staggering. While other big Asian economies like Vietnam and Taiwan were facing tariffs in the neighborhood of 20%, India got slammed with 50%. That's not just a small difference. It makes India a complete outlier and puts its exporters at a massive, massive disadvantage. So, what was the official justification for this extra heavy penalty? Well, the administration pointed directly to India's decision to purchase Russian oil. They basically added a 25% penalty right on top of the base tariff just for that. And this is where we really get to the core of the issue. Rajan argues that we need to look past all the arguments about fairness or national sovereignty. What's really happening here is a high-stakes power play, one with very clear winners and losers, including inside of India itself. He states it about as directly as you can. He says, forget all the discussions about who's right and who's wrong. What we're really witnessing here is just a raw exercise of economic power. And if this truly is a power play, well, it forces us to ask a pretty tough question. Within India, who's benefiting from the decisions that led to this, and who's being forced to foot the bill? And this right here illustrates that internal trade-off Rajan is talking about so perfectly. On one side of the ledger, you've got Indian oil refiners who are definitely benefiting from getting access to cheaper Russian oil. But on the other side, you have entire industries, shrimp, textiles, gems and jewelry, that are now paying the price through these absolutely massive tariffs. It's a classic case of the gains for one group creating a whole lot of pain for another. But you know what they say? Every crisis presents an opportunity. And that's exactly how Rajan frames this whole episode, not as a disaster, but as a critical, can't-miss wake-up call for India to rethink its entire economic strategy. This, he argues, is that wake-up call. This is the moment to pivot from just dealing with a crisis to building a real solution. So what does that path forward actually look like? First things first, it requires everyone to acknowledge a brand new reality. We are living in an age of what you could call weaponized trade, where economic tools like tariffs are being used as instruments of foreign policy. The old rules, they just don't apply anymore. So, given this new world, Rajan lays out a clear, three-pronged strategy. First, you've got to keep negotiating pragmatically with the US to try and de-escalate things. Second, and this is so crucial, you have to diversify. You can't be overly dependent on any single country. Look east, look to Europe, look to Africa. And third, use this very crisis as the catalyst to finally unleash those long-pending domestic reforms that make Indian businesses more competitive on the world stage. Because really, the ultimate goal here is so much bigger than just surviving one trade dispute. It's about using this moment to push through the reforms needed to achieve that 8.5% growth, the magic number required to create jobs for India's huge and growing young population. This crisis, he argues, could be the very trigger needed to finally get that done. And so, that leaves us with the final critical question. The path from this crisis to real reform seems clear. But what will it truly take for India to actually turn this tariff shock into a historic opportunity?